Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we are talking about how essentially the entire future, the entire currently planned future of Pokemon has leaked, and it is absolutely amazing. We did talk about some of these leaks yesterday, but oddly, even though none of the main sources on Twitter or anywhere have been taken down, and what I covered, the part that they targeted, was just about Legend ZA and it being good, they blocked the video. So I'm going to be very careful about footage being shared here, and I will be summarizing what was covered yesterday in case you missed it, but also have timestamps so you can move forward to the new stuff if you already saw everything from yesterday. There is so much that has been leaked about the future of Pokemon here, and we're going to be breaking down a lot of this stuff about Generation 10, about Generation 11, about this huge epic remake that's also going to incorporate several different regions that will also be an MMO. Like, this is actually stuff that's being leaked from internal documentation here. These are real leaks, this is real information, these are real plans that Game Freak and Pokemon Company made a few years ago. And so yes, there's some room for changes to have been made over the last few years and when these projects eventually do see the light of day, but they are working on some very, very exciting, amazing, incredible stuff. And so that's what we're diving into this time. Do you find yourself feeling tired, unable to take a good nap during the day from wherever you may be? Then perhaps you are in need of a soft, comfortable sleep mask that blocks out all light. Fortunately, Manta Sleep, the sponsor for today's video, has just that, a quality sleep mask. This sleep mask has super soft, comfy cushions that cover your eyes and block out all light. It's easy to adjust to different sizes, and it feels great to wear, and it's helped me personally fit in just a bit more rest during my days. So if you're looking to improve your sleep and energy, check out the Manta Sleep Mask using the link in the description below with my code SLEEPRESTART. So first, let's go everything that you may have missed if you didn't get a chance to see yesterday's video. One big section was basically that we've heard from different people who've already played the game and beaten the game. Pokemon Legends ZA is apparently a very good game. We'll see in a few short days when it comes out, but that's kind of the gist of a big chunk of the leaks from yesterday. I will not be covering any of the Mega Evolutions or forms or anything like that, because if I even mention anything about a giant jaw that's red, they may block the video. But on to all the juicy stuff about Generation 10. So for Generation 10, as usual, there are going to be two different versions. One will be Pokemon Wind, the other will be Pokemon Wave. I'm not sure if it's going to be Winds and Waves, but Wind and Wave, something like that, is apparently the titles for the next Pokemon games. The theme is going to be based off Infinity, and we'll touch on what this Infinity concept will be about a little bit later. It's set to be coming out next year, 2026, for Pokemon's 30th anniversary. The region is based off Southeast Asia and Indonesia. There's going to be a whole bunch of islands. Now, the box legendaries, one is based off the personality of an old man, the other is based off the personality of an old lady. Winds for the old man, waves for the old lady, legendary. And these legendaries will only accept a human if they have properly raised a special seed Pokemon, which is a new component in Generation 10, these seed Pokemon. Apparently, you're going to find a special seed Pokemon in this resort area, which is the beginning area of the game apparently, and you're going to raise this Pokemon throughout your adventure, and if you raise it well enough, when you get to these islands that would have the legendaries, that's where it will evolve. And interestingly, it's being said that these seed Pokemon, when they evolve, can have an infinite amount of variations. Again, we'll get to the whole infinity thing. There is this component here that I want to touch on, but I'll cover it all at the same time. So just keep that in mind for a little while longer. Something else that's going to be new to this game is this new mechanic for weather moves. There's going to be special moves that tie in the weather. Given that the titles of the game are going to be Wind and Waves, it seems like they're going to be diving deeper into weather mechanics, and I find this interesting because there's already weather mechanics in the Pokemon games. You have sunny day, you have snowstorms, you have rain, you have the sandstorms, and there are different moves and abilities that take advantage of that. It seems like they're going to be diving even further into this. How will they expand upon that? Well, I guess we'll learn that next year. The evil team this time around is actually a company that's destroying nature to provide more usable land, and they're doing this for money. And a professor, I'm not sure if it's the professor, but a professor is going to be some kind of nature guide that you also meet in this resort area at the beginning of the game. And they study the relationship between Pokemon and weather, which seems to be a big theme of this game. Now, on the note of the beginning area of this game, the opening setting is apparently a very big city that's like a huge tourist attraction. And this time around, Game Freak is set on breaking the patterns they've had from prior Pokemon games, including having the start of the games be in small towns. So it looks like they are aiming to subvert our expectations here. The main area these sort of gather around is this resort, as we've mentioned a few times already, and apparently it can function as a bit of an MMO lobby, so you're going to be able to connect with other players, similar to a lobby you might find in other massive multiplayer online games, and this is going to be a big component to this one. Now, is it going to be to the same extent as something like World of Warcraft? I doubt it, but we have already seen that generation to generation, Game Freak has been exploring this idea of having cooperative play and incorporating different online elements with other Pokemon players, so they may be expanding upon that more so. We already saw that in Scarlet and Violet you could explore the open world with your friends, so they may be building upon that even more. Now, I'm not going to be sharing any screenshots or documentation of this stuff. The sources of this stuff will be linked in the description below if it's even still around by the time you see this video, but there is a screenshot going around from the documentation that shows what they're aiming for visually for this game, and a lot of people are freaking out about it because it looks incredible. I'll just share with you this footage from Donkey Kong Bonanza of DK Isle because it looks really similar. Imagine something like this, except instead of Donkey Kong and further Kongs, it's different Pokemon. It might actually be a little bit more detailed than what we're seeing in Bonanza, but that's kind of the general look. Now, there's also talk of there being underwater exploration, and there's actually some footage out there for that as well that showcases the graphical engine, and it kind of reminds me of the visuals we saw in New Pokemon Snap Under the Water. So that looks pretty good, and if they're going to be able to achieve something like that for the mainline games at a higher resolution because it would be on Switch 2, man, that would be really hype. I think a lot of people would probably stop complaining about the graphics in the Pokemon games. Now, will they actually accomplish that? We'll see. But yeah, there's some exciting stuff out there that they're at least working on. Now, on to this point about the Infinity. There's talk of there being procedurally generated islands and caves, and this would also apply to the infinite variations of this seed Pokemon when it evolves. It can have a variety of different designs on it. And this all comes down to this procedural generation that can lead to essentially an infinite amount of possibilities here. Now, there are games that already take advantage of some of this technology, like you look at, for example, No Man's Sky or its successor, Light No Fire. These are games with worlds that are procedurally generated, and so you have these super vast, unique environments with so much to find and explore. They may be going for something like this with the next Pokemon game, which seems a bit hard to believe. It seems like a lot to really pull off, but that is what these leaks are literally saying, so there's got to be at least something to it. Of course, I wouldn't be totally surprised if a few years later they kind of shift a little bit because they realized their goal was a little bit too lofty. That's just me speculating here. Maybe they do accomplish it. I'm just saying, take this with a grain of salt, because this is from information a few years back. Plans can change. Now, if you've got to this point in the video, I would simply like to point out that I have this goal to reach 60,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so if you do find yourself enjoying my content, my different videos, I would appreciate your support in whatever form that may come in, and I thank you for watching all this time. Now, moving on to stuff that I did not touch on at all yesterday that has continued to come out. This game, Generation 10, is going to be a Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive, which actually gives me some optimism about the visuals as we've been talking about the environments. Maybe it can look something like Donkey Kong Bonanza, but with Pokemon. That's possible. Maybe they will continue running Pokemon games at 60 frames per second like the Switch 2 edition for Legends ZA and other Nintendo titles on the console. maybe the underwater environments will look something like what we saw from new Pokemon Snap. And maybe they will be able to pull off these procedurally generated islands and caves and other elements somewhat similar to No Man's Sky and Light No Fire. That would be incredible. It being a Switch 2 exclusive makes it more believable to me. Now, something else neat that's been noted is that every Pokemon can be ridden or is interactive in some way. Maybe you can pet them or do something with them. The idea here is that every Pokemon in this game, you're going to be able to do that. Now, reminder, over the last few years, Game Freak has not been putting every single Pokemon in these games. They usually pick a few hundred, and then the others are made available with other entries in the generation later on. And one of those entries for later on in the generation looks to be the next Legends game. They are apparently planning to continue this series, which really should come as no surprise. And this time around, at least according to the documents from a few years back, they are aiming to set this game in Galar, and it'll be many years in the past, where it'll be focused on trying to build a Pokeball for capturing Dynamaxed Pokemon, the giant, supersized, Titan-sized Pokemon. Now, another interesting thing that's being said here is that they were inspired to go in this direction from Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition. And I wonder if that has something to do with the fact that in Xenoblade Chronicles X you have this vast environment, but there's also a great deal of skill. You have your base character, but later on to the game you get these skells that are these giant mechs, and you have this massive world to explore, but once you actually get into these mechs that are far larger, you have a better chance of fighting super huge, large monsters and reaching even greater heights and areas in the world. So there may be something to that idea, and they may be building this game around interacting with giant, supersized Pokemon, and perhaps also environments, which, honestly, that sounds really exciting. Now, we've also heard about Generation 11. They are targeting a 2030 date, which is actually extremely interesting, because that will be 4 years after 2026, which is when we're supposedly getting Generation 10. And this is a big deal because before Generation 10, which supposedly is coming out next year, we've been getting generations every 3 years. And now, this last year we had a break, there was no mainline release, and now we're about to get Legends ZA for this year of 2025. It seems like Game Freak took a step back, took a little bit of extra time to work on some of their projects, and now they're spreading things out a bit more, which will make it easier for them to make their upcoming games better releases. So the fact that it now looks like they're spreading out the generations across 4 years instead of 3, that's going to make for a significant difference in quality here. So that's actually huge, huge news. Now, something crazy is that we actually have a document that is showing the planned dates or release windows for the next big Pokemon games. So, Winds and Waves, Gen 10 is supposed to come out next year, 2026, but its DLC will be for 2027. Legends Galar is planned for 2027 or later. This multi-region remake is planned for 2028 or later. And you may be curious on what this big remake is if you haven't heard about it yet. It's Project Seed. It's supposed to be a huge remake that will incorporate several different regions. Johto, Kanto, Sinnoh, and Hoenn. You'll be able to explore all these regions, including Kitakami, which I believe is supposed to be like another part to Sinnoh, if I'm not mistaken. But you're gonna have like this massive map that's incorporating a lot of the classic traditional regions, I guess the first 4, with other little extra areas in between, like maybe Kitakami, as we just talked about. And this is also going to be not just a massive open world with all these regions, but also an MMO. They're going to continue to build upon this MMO concept. This is actually legitimate, real documentation that Game Freak is working on the Pokemon game of our dreams. This is literally it. This is like the Pokemon game I have fantasized about like most of my life, or many, many years. So they're actually working on this, or at least had plans for it a few years back. Will it come to fruition? I don't know, but I have a feeling it probably will come out. Will it be good? That's the bigger question, but they are working on something like this, and that just sounds absolutely incredible. So, yes, I am so hyped for the future of Pokemon here. And then after that, they're going to move on to Generation 11. So they have a whole bunch of amazing stuff planned with Pokemon that I'm sure will absolutely help to sell the Nintendo Switch too. But let's come back to Generation 10. So there's like a summation of a lot of the features that Generation 10 is going to have. There's going to be a big focus on a gym adventure. There's going to be challenges. It's going to incorporate all 18 types. It seems like they're kind of going back to Pokemon Sun and Moon, which was also based off a few different tropical islands, by the way. And so they're going to have like your typical gym challenges, but also special quests as well. And there's going to be maybe like something like boss fights or some kind of totem challenge. So that's going to be an element to the game. They're going to have a quest centered around weather moves. They're going to have a quest around getting your ride license. And so to me, what this kind of sounds like is a little bit of the structure we saw with Scarlet and Violet, where they had sort of 3 different main campaigns to do that you can kind of do however you would like. And once you complete all 3 main quests, you then unlock a final closing main quest that leads to a pretty interesting set of events that has some pretty good stories. So they may be doing something very similar here with these different quests. But there are also going to be some form of raid battles, as we've seen with prior Pokemon games, but this is going to have some MMO-like elements. So as we've been talking about, they're going to continue to expand upon this online connectivity with different players and incorporating them into your own adventure and facilitating a sharing of each other's adventures. But there's also going to be this focus on rescuing Pokemon and survival. We've already talked about how the professor is known as a survival professor and how they're studying like weather and the relationship with Pokemon, but also how there's going to be a focus on jungle environments and going underwater and all these different islands. It seems like there's going to be a huge focus on nature this time around, like more so than usual. So that sounds like something that's going to make the gameplay of these games even better. Something that I've been thinking about is that because we have Pokemon Champions, which is going to be kind of like the main platform for the competitive format, that may give Game Freak more license and freedom to sort of experiment more with the gameplay and the combat of future mainline games, because if they do shy away from the typical battle format, it's okay, because that typical battle format is still available with Pokemon Champions, where the competitive circuit is being held. But anyway, they have all this stuff. They're going to have boss Pokemon. There's going to be diving. It sounds like they're really doing a lot of cool stuff for this generation. And oh, by the way, there's going to be a new graphics engine this time around. As we sort of touched on already, there's like depictions of some pretty cool underwater environments, really detailed jungle environments. So considering all these procedurally generated islands, each island may have different types of jungly environments, and in between these islands there's going to be a lot of water exploration, which apparently is going to include diving. So we're talking about some huge, vast, wide in scope environments to explore for Gen 10. Now, one more thing I'll cover here, there is apparently a note from the documentation that for Generation 5 onwards, like for Black and White onwards, their remakes are going to be made with more care. Following what happened with Pokemon Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl, they want to handle things a bit differently, and so they're going to make sure that remakes moving forward are going to have a great deal of quality. Considering what we're hearing about this multi-region remake that's going to have MMO elements, sounds like they're headed in an amazing direction, but this also means that a remake of Pokemon Black and White is likely many years away. We've already seen the plans, and at the very earliest, it's probably not going to come out until 2032, because there would be DLC for Generation 11, which is supposedly coming out in 2030 and 2031. That's when the DLC would come. So it looks like we're many years away before Black and White remakes, but like I said, if we're getting a huge remake of multiple regions after Gen 10, that might even be better than Generation 10. And then if we're also getting something like Legends games in between that, like we could be looking at the true golden age of Pokemon, which is kind of wild to say considering the last few years and all the criticisms, but it may have all been leading to this. We have much higher expectations of Pokemon games now because they are on more powerful hardware, because Nintendo just has the Switch and the Switch 2, these hybrid consoles, and they don't have like this secondary, cheaper handheld option. Game Freak has to put their games on Nintendo's primary platform because that's all there is. And so these primary platforms are not just handheld devices, but also home consoles as well. So there are much higher expectations there in terms of graphical fidelity, performance, features, technology, scope, and we've clearly seen that Game Freak has been struggling, but they have been taking different steps over the years to position themselves better. They took that break. They're having longer generations. They now have Pokemon Champions, so they don't have to focus on the competitive format for the mainline games. They have things like Legends now. They have DLC, so they can focus on that instead of putting out a whole other release. They no longer put out every single Pokemon per game, but just a few hundred at a time, making things a bit more feasible. All of these different things, and I'm sure more, are streamlining the development process and putting them in a position to start to put better games. And if what we're hearing is true about Legends ZA being a pretty good game, that's absolutely a great sign, and everything we're hearing about these leaks are even better signs. The future is looking extremely bright. Amazing. I am hyped. But how about all of you? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget, you can use my code SLEEPRESTART when checking the link in the description below for the Manta Sleep Mask. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.